Oh, thank God you guys are here. I've been on the lookout for the ghost of Gracie Abrams. I know, it's a really scary ordeal. I'm spooked out of my pants right now. I am wearing pants, but that's not the point. As for what Gracie Abrams been doing, she's been possessing popular artists and making them do horrible things. Her trademark thing that she's been making them do, it's taking artists' new albums and making them change the album art from something creative to just their face on a blank background. It's a bit of an odd strategy from her, but I guess she is a ghost, so it's a bit odd. But anyways, if you see anything that you think might be the work of Gracie, just please tell me, because I gotta put a stop to this. But thankfully, haven't seen anything yet that might be her, but you can never be too careful. Hey everybody, welcome back to another Irish Porygon video. Today, another episode of everyone's favorite series, First Impressions. It's the show where we review albums as soon as possible after they come out. I'm your host, as usual, Gavin, and today what do we have? We have a new album by beabadoobee. It's a bit of a mouthful to say, which is why I'll be shortening it to B for the rest of this video, because that is hard to say, and also B is her first name. Well, Beatrice, but I'm gonna pretend I'm her friend and can call her B. I'm not delusional, you're delusional. Anyways, this is her third album, and it's called This Is How Tomorrow Moves. It's a bit of a corny title, but what isn't a corny title these days? But yes, the third album by this superstar Filipino-British singer-songwriter, beabadoobee, who has taken off really well in recent years, being a very down-to-earth indie songwriter as she takes off in her very young career. Being only 23, she still has a lot of work left in her, I would assume, and this is just more evidence of that, being her third full-length album. She's an artist with a very unique, nostalgic sort of style, and also a really fantastically talented voice. She's able to kind of rein in this interesting style where it's not the overblown whisper sing that we've heard so many artists kind of capitalize on, the only one really of note being Billie Eilish, but she has kind of risen above that group to kind of have this interesting, quiet, but not whispery quality to her singing, which has provided a bit of leeway as she kind of is able to really wedge herself in between the traditional singing types and the whisper singing types and kind of make a name for herself there. You may have heard her on her most famous track being the Glue song, a single released in the middle of last year, as that is sort of a great example of what you can find in her deeper parts of her discography. I will admit I have not really done a deep dive into all of her work as of yet, but from what I have heard from her, between the different tracks that I have investigated and tracks that have come up on other people's playlists and recommendations, I really like what I hear, as she seems like a very consistent artist, never really dipping below anything close to mediocre, and staying as a pretty good artist with a lot of potential. And coming onto the scene with her third album here, I'm expecting no less than that consistent self that she has presented across her other two works. However, I gotta admit, as you could tell from my opening skit, I do not dig this album cover whatsoever. Especially from stuff that we've seen on previous works such as Beatopia, her second work. I just feel like she has more artistic license and artistic ability to create compelling and unique album covers than just her face in a studio with a blue background. And I feel like there could be a lot more potential here. Of course, we aren't here to judge album covers, we're here to judge what's actually inside the albums, but I just feel like one face shot is just not very interesting. But no points against the music. Let's take a look at what's actually inside this album. As far as Bee's development as an artist, there's some very interesting stuff here, as she leans more heavily than we've seen before into 90s indie rock aesthetics. You can hear her in a lot of these tracks, and it's executed quite well nearly all the time. You can tell that she just has a deep love and appreciation for that sort of music, and it comes through in a way that's very respectful, not being in a copycat or nostalgia bait fashion, but in a way that makes it her own, and I can really appreciate that, as she makes the music her own in a way that only she can. I imagine that bringing Rick Rubin on as producer was a very smart artistic choice, as he has seen plenty of that sort of music in his time, and is really able to help artists reach new heights a lot of the times through his very unconventional approach to producing. And you can see this influence right away as this album picks up really strong, just bringing a total A-game right off the bat. But as for how this A-game sounds, let's dip into it right away as we go into the track list. Track number 1 is called Take a Bite, and I gave it a 9. I like this track a lot, as Take a Bite is just a really great and punchy pop track, but also adopts some considerable amounts of rock inspiration and rock production styles. As this song adopts an almost like rock-oriented song structure and instrumentation, but leaves the pop production and lyricism and other aspects from that genre as well, including things like pop melodies and hooks that we know beabadoobee is experienced in writing. And it's interesting because it creates this kind of new approach to pop rock where you're not really fusing every aspect of every genre that you're combining together, but you're taking select advantages from different albums. You take the production of pop, you take the instrumentation of rock, you take the melodies of pop, and kind of fuse them together in that way, which kind of creates a very new sound for me, where it doesn't really feel like a traditional fusion of these genres, but rather something new and fresh that is really in Bee's style. While I will say this style doesn't play completely to Bee's strengths as a vocalist specifically, Bee is able to prove on this track that she can make just about anything sound great, as she just has that silky smooth voice which can just pierce right through and hit you hard. It's a great opening track, and it gets you excited perfectly as you head into the rest of this album, including track number 2, which is called California. I also gave this track a 9. This is just a very intriguing approach to pop rock, and it's continuing here as Bee is getting a little bit more raucous, a little bit more garage rocky as you kind of pick up a bit of a tinge of that genre, as this track features really heavy guitars and experimental drum sounds that I think are very interesting and unique. I will note that especially that post-chorus guitar riff is really, really cool, really ear-catching, when while the vocals are a little bit more to her style here, I feel like she is not really putting the right amount of edge, I guess, the right amount of bite on her vocals, as she still sings in that kind of soft way, which is her trademark, granted, but I would have liked to have seen a little bit more edge in this song, as the instrumentation really brings it, but she kind of has this oddly contrasting, softer approach to her singing. However, I do have to note that the mix is really, really good. I think that every instrument pops just the right amount, feels like it has just the right amount of fuzz, the right amount of everything. Despite her vocals not really fitting the song as I discussed, they still pop really well, as she pierces right through that mix, right in the right spots, and really hits hard. So despite that one note on the vocals, I think this is still a really phenomenal and catchy pop rock track. Song 3 I didn't dig tremendously. I only gave it a 5. One Time was really the first example on this album that I just didn't dig, really almost at all. The things that did stand out to me, I can list them here. That the bass line was pretty great. I loved the way the bass was mixed, the way the bass was handled on this track. And I also felt like Bee's vocals were really up to that standard, up to that edge, up to what they needed to be. But other than that, the song structure and lyrics and things were just kind of basic, as there were quite a few aspects of the song that just left more to be desired. And there were a couple creative choices that I just did not dig at all. Such as the bridge having some truly awful double tracking jobs that I feel like could have used a little bit more nuance, and I do have to admit that the ending of this song falls a bit flat. And also, unfortunately, the mini guitar solo right before the bridge is some of the worst guitar work I have heard in a while, as it just feels very dissonant in too many places to really hit. The first half of this song is decent, but the last half falls off far too much for me to push it aside, which is why I'm feeling that 5. Track 4 is called Real Man. I gave it a 6. It was better than the last track, but still is notably weaker than the first two, as it goes more in the pop direction, which there's nothing wrong with that inherently, but it loses some of the edge and character that was developed across those first two tracks, which is huge, as I was coming to expect that character. I think embracing that alt-rock side of her persona really allowed her to have some more edge, some more sass, and some more interesting and experimental choices which just don't appear on this track. Because this bossa nova slash bedroom pop sort of blend is what she's known for, but I feel like it is a well that is slowly being drained of value as she puts out more work that just falls into the samey category. This song still has an interesting melody and a neat structure to it, but there are just a couple things that are just really lacking on this track that hit well on other tracks, leading me to feel a bit dissatisfied with the way this track turned out. Track 5 is called Tie My Shoes. I also gave it a 6. Tie My Shoe does prove to be a bit more interesting, and for me, it is getting close to that 7 score, as it has a bit more character than Real Man, as we just saw. Most notably, this song maintains some limited rock aspects, but also does lean considerably into that bedroom pop aesthetic that we have heard. The main difference between this one and Real Man is that there are some more interesting guitar parts, some more interesting guitar tones, and production work on that end, but it really just doesn't have enough going for it as a unique track of its own, as it sort of blends in to the mire of familiarity, which is kind of a death sentence for most tracks. There's still some really solid aspects about this track, as I said, but it is starting to fall into that bit of a samey-samey vibe. Track number 6 is called Girl Song. I gave it a 6. I will say it's probably good for me to note that I am not the target audience on this song, clearly, but let's address it anyways. With that under consideration, this track has switched things up quite a bit from previous works, being a very simple piano vocals duet track. I liked the lyrics and I liked the cozy vibe a lot, and felt like it was a pretty decently written song. Its main problems, however, lie in the fact that, one, the piano is mixed to be far too bright and far too piercing, where I feel like on a cozy, vibey song like this, you need kind of that muffled and warm vibe, which we're not really getting here. Because I feel like something a little bit more muted, a little bit more soft, would have really emphasized the coziness aspects of this song. And for number 2, I will have to say that this song lacks any sort of memorable hook, which is very important for a pop song such as this. It has some nice chords and it has some nice vocal parts, but other than that, I'm not really feeling much in the melody department, which is a big problem as it lacks that hummability. And in conclusion, a unique line or hook or something like that would have made this song so much more interesting and memorable. Track 7 is called Coming Home, and I gave it a 7. Coming Home does nail the more at-home feel than the previous track, as the guitar is more muted and produced a little bit more softly than the piano in the previous track, and the guitar part is interesting, being in this sort of waltzy feel. And accompanied by a very fluttery vocal melody over the top, it's very interesting. It's very simple, and not in a bad way, as it just holds on to that simplicity and acknowledges it and works with what it is. As the short runtime on this song keeps it fresh and makes sure that it does not overstay its welcome. However, that instrumental sort of in the middle around the 2/3 mark, while being a solid melody and a solidly written piece, I feel like there is a serious disconnect with that from the rest of the song, being that this muted trumpet and snare drum come in just for this instrumental and then disappear into a song which is supposed to be very relaxed and chill and not too many surprises being on this track. I feel like there's a serious disconnect with the instrumental from the rest of the song. And the instrumental is not short, being about 20 seconds, so it's not something you can just brush away as an odd transition. It is a section that feels quite out of place. So compositionally, it is a great pop track, but there are some seriously unfortunate creative choices which can really hold it back. After reaching the halfway point of this album, Ever Seen, I gave an 8. It's the first truly great pop-oriented song on this record, as it features a very interesting and experimental guitar sound, which provides some needed creativity and switch-up to this album. And as it dives into a very unique and interesting chorus later on, you can really get into it as it drives really well. This song has some very real energy and passion in it, and it's even infused with a touch of folk music, just a touch. There's some very interestingly stringy synth tones that I kind of dig, as I haven't really heard those kind of string emulatory sort of sounds before. And added on to that tone being good, the melodies that they bring are also quite nice and creative. And all in all, on this song, it comes together to just make some really interesting and unique soundscapes that add some freshness to this album. The next track, Cruel Affair, I gave a 7. It continues the streak of interesting rock infusion, and this time falls a little bit closer to some calypso music. Not totally calypso, but adds a little bit of that vibe, as it features some great, indie 90s guitar lines and a very warm tonal bass line, and an interesting drum groove over some bossa nova style guitar. This is where B hits her stride a lot more often, where her trademark bossa pop style combines with something else and makes a very new flavor. This time being those alternative and rock additions which we have seen her utilize strongly on other places of the album. And I feel no differently about this track. While it doesn't have any sort of strong hook, it gets away with it for the most part by just having a style that differentiates itself from the rest of the album, standing out as a memorable track which you are not likely to mix up with something else on this album. Structurally and melodically, there is a little something to be desired there, but all in all, a nicely written and composed track. The next song, Post, I gave a 5, because while it brings back that rock style that I've explained is where she hits her stride, this one doesn't do it quite quite as well or to the same level of execution. The bass line is interesting, sure, and I do like the drum intro, but the absence of, again, a hummable lead part is really hurting this one on higher levels. And similarly, the absence of a strong chorus here hurts, as the very empty feeling of those choruses does not feel like the part of the song that is supposed to explode. It just feels like this weird, kind of awkward growing pains section, as the empty vocal parts in these sections are not filled up very well by this kind of odd orchestra synthesizers, which kind of rubs the wrong way as being annoying more than anything, unfortunately. I just all in all feel like this track is a bit misguided and is lacking a few key elements, which could really elevate it to a different level. But instead, those parts are gone, leaving it feeling a bit empty and hollow in the process. However, the next track, Beaches, I thought was pretty great. I gave it a 9, because this is truly a great pop rock track, as it features a super catchy chorus, some nice vocals, 2 great instrumentals, including one truly phenomenal guitar solo, and this track is just really exciting. The bass line is accentuated super nicely, the guitars are hitting hard but not so hard that they overstay, and the accents by the strange glockenspiel and mellotron sounds are really nice and tasteful, albeit being a bit low in the mix. The only thing really holding this track back from being a 10 is just a couple oddities in the recording that I picked up on, such as a bit of an odd, awkward ending to the guitar solo, and a couple more things that could have used another take or another try, but other than those few nuanced oddities, this is a phenomenal track. Everything I Want I gave an 8 because while it's nothing too flashy, this track incorporates elements of folk and country a little bit, just a tiny bit of twang, just the slightest bit. But that slightest bit goes a long way, as it kind of adds a interesting flair to this song, which makes you sure to not forget it. And also, this track even incorporates just a touch of, like, odd ragtime at the end, which I was interested in and getting into, as this song helps provide a very comfortable and fun break before heading into the final 2 tracks on this album. Because with some nice instrumentation and a very laid-back feel, there is not really too much to complain about here. I will say that the guitar tone on the rhythm guitar was a bit too bright and piercing, as I felt like it took away from some other aspects and parts of this song. But other than that, this is just a decent and solid track that I enjoyed listening through a lot. Track 13 is called The Man Who Left Too Soon. I gave it a 6, as this is a very short and cute track with a very simple yet strangely driving bass and guitar groove, accompanied by some very deliberately dissonant notes which actually hit the spot quite well. It's quite unique to say the least, and is an interesting and unique minute and a half of music, but I am left wondering why it's really here, as its placement in the album feels just like a bit of odd filler than anything special. This Is How It Went gets a 7 from me, as it is the final track on this album. While certainly a fine song, it doesn't really strike me as an ending track, which is a problem. It kind of lacks the climax, or the finality, or grandness, or really any of the aspects that individually I would expect at least one from a final track. And I was left a little bit dissatisfied, hoping for a bit more variety or experimentation on this track, seeing as how experimentation with rock is a big theme on many of the tracks here. So I would have liked to have seen that rather than the slower, safer ideas that we got here. That being said, this song does prove B's continued consistency, providing a nice and cute piano hook, accompanied by equally as ear-catching vocal hooks, and some really nice bass lines on that big acoustic bass, which brings a very warm and full sound to this track. It's not the most memorable track on this album, and it is a bit of a letdown as a climax, but as far as most songs go, it does hold its own and is pretty good. So, to wrap this up here, this album feels like a bit of an amalgamation between a very old version of B and a new version of B. The old version is seen near the middle of the album, where we see kind of her old trademark style, and the new version is heard with that interesting experimentation into 90s indie, 90s rock, and that sort of vibe. I feel like it was the right move to bring in Rick Rubin as producer and kind of have him help expand the limits of what B can do. One of the main downsides ends up being the track ordering here, as it's easy to criticize this track list for being far too front-heavy, because both the heavy-hitting tracks come out swinging really early, and then you're kind of left expecting that climax again, which you never really get, which is a massive pitfall for this sort of album. One notable impact of this is that the finale track was left feeling quite boring, as it didn't really expand on the experimentation that we heard in those tracks specifically. All this to say, I do have to admit that the songwriting is pretty strong, as she leans on her usual themes, B is able to stay very anchored in what she knows while feeling free to experiment on some of the instrumentation and some of the other aspects of her music. The main area where she is expanding being instrumentally, as she is able to kind of tap into influences and passions that she has developed and really experiment and develop those into her music, which feels like a very natural development for her as an artist. And while the tracks in the middle of this album do falter often in the uniqueness department, the opening tracks do really show flashes of really just a wealth of creativity that I think B has yet to tap into. The thing is, I was just a bit disappointed by this album, as I feel like it didn't tap into that gem mine as much as I thought it would based on those opening tracks and the singles. However, I can't deny the fact that none of the tracks on this album are bad. They just kind of hit a level of mediocrity and dissatisfaction at times. It's not even always. There are several tracks on this album that are bops. There are just a lot of those mediocre tracks pulling it back from what I think could truly be an interesting experimentation for her. And of course, the 3 absolute indescribable bangers on this track give you enough reason to come back, which proves that B still has a very distinct staying power with her music and gives you reasons to revisit. So all things considered, despite the significance of those several errors that I listed, I am liking the trajectory of B as an artist going forward. I think she is someone to really watch closely as she kind of gets a bit more serious and delves into new sides of her music and new aspects that she wants to try. And for that reason, she's someone that you should keep on your radar going forward. Because I think she's going to continue to experiment, push her limits, and discover new things about herself as a songwriter. Until then, I think there are kinks to work out, that is for sure. But this is a promising album, as I stated, which is why I'm feeling a low 7 on this album, and I look forward to future albums she may put out in the next several years. That's gonna do it for this one. Thanks so much for watching, guys. This means a lot to me as you guys continue to watch my videos. If you want to vote on what albums I review in future weeks, make sure to go to my Instagram and you can vote there every week. Also, make sure to subscribe. I am leaving for college soon and there might not be a video next week, so don't forget about me. Hit that subscribe button so that you get notified next time a video comes out. Please, it means a lot. Thank you guys so much for watching again, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.